It is. Sorry. Let me make sure I'm on. Am I on? Can you guys hear me? I'm not on. Am I now? I'm on? Sweet. So good to see you guys all keyed up this morning. Can we give the worship team a hand? Hey, want to just remind you of a couple of things before we get into our talk this morning. Just a couple of things quickly. The first one is about next week. Next week, Celebration Sunday. You don't want to miss it. It's so cool. So, for those of you who haven't been part of it, I'll remind you quickly what we do. We do not have any teaching next Sunday. It's all about you guys sharing what you want to celebrate about, looking back about who Jesus has been in your heart this last month, this last year, whatever. But keep it short because there's a lot of us here and we want to celebrate well together. It is so much fun to hear how God has worked in your heart. So next Sunday, just come ready to share. If you want to sign up, we'll talk to me afterward and we'll get you on a list. And the rest of you, it's going to be random. It's one of my favorite Sundays of the year. So next Sunday, Celebration Sunday. The other two are from the last week. Friday, Saturday. Saturday was Veterans Day. We don't want to forget about our veterans. Please, if you've served in any branch of the armed forces, would you stand up, and we want to celebrate you and thank you for what you've done. Please stand. Thank you so much for your service. You guys rock. You guys rock. The other thing, we have one more person that we need to celebrate. That's Joanne. She stuck with me 33 years. All right. We had a couple days away, and I just asked her. I said, "Why?" And yes, rookie mistake right there. Been a fantastic journey together. Thanks, Joanne. You're the best. A couple other things just real quickly. Dave's going to be leaving us. Ozzy and Nikki already have left. For those, just keep remembering as a family, keep remembering those who winter at other places, at warmer places, who are fortunate enough to leave the valley. If you like warmer, Dave, it's going to miss you. Before we get into our verses, I just want to say, did you think about the words of the song that we just sang? There's no prison walls. Aren't you so grateful for that reality? One of the cool things we get to do in our class this week is we each get to tell about our stories to each other. And so Joanne and I, as we were spending a couple days together, we started talking about our lives before we met each other, and just some of that. I am so profoundly thankful to Jesus that he's bigger than any prison I was in. And we can celebrate that next Sunday, and just be praying for those of us who share our stories, because God's going to do something really cool in that class. I know he is. So this is Pursuing Purpose Part 2. I didn't put that down. I'm going to have the same verses as last week. I'm going to wrap up the talk on purpose this week. And I really wish I toyed with having a couple of, because there's a lot of stuff, and I'm like, you know what, we probably need to tap out of this. You guys are probably a little weary of hearing about it, but I think this is so central to who we are. If we really get a handle on who he is and how he invites us to be part of what he's doing here in the earth, it's an incredible thing that he even invites us to be part of that. So we're going to read a couple of verses, and then this morning we're going to try to make this practical, vague and practical at the same time. General, I'll say. Vague is general. I'm not going to tell you how to find your purpose, but I want you to think about a couple of categories together. So the verses are just simply this. Okay, so you want to know what an idea of why you're here? Here's what you don't do. Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others is better than yourself. Man, you want motivation for purpose. Right there it is. You want an attitude that will lead you into engaging people in broken people in your. Right there it is. When you start looking at others and saying, "You matter." You really do. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. And then this, for even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many. For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. They are plans for good and not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope. Father, I thank you this morning for this time together. Father, your presence was so real. And it's so real. And we thank you for that. We thank you that we don't have to beg you to be here. You just show up because we're here. And you show up to touch our hearts. And Father, whatever junk we brought into the building this morning, the cares of last week, maybe the bad decisions of last week, the messes of last week, the victories of whatever we show up with here, you invite us to come into your presence and to be renewed and refreshed and re-energized for another week ahead. So just touch us deeply with your Spirit. In Jesus' name, amen. Now I don't have the slide for this. A couple of weeks ago, it may have been more than a couple of weeks ago, I put up a slide that three kind of ideas. There was actually 4 on the slide. I want to just remind you of 3 of them quickly as we go to this to wrap up this idea of purpose, and then we're going to go to just some general principles from it, and then how just some real basic ideas where to start. Remember that I told you that we looked at the verse that when they're writing about how God views our life and all of that, it says this about you in the original language. The concept is simply this: that before you showed up, there was a thesis written about your life. I hope that grips you. Like somewhere there was a parliament in heaven that was writing about you. Because as you showed up here in the earth, you showed up with the possibility of engaging and being part of a plan that is way bigger than you. So that's the information part. The second, it was the third idea on that slide. The second idea I want to talk about today. It wasn't just enough, and here's the beauty of the plan of salvation. It wasn't just enough that he wrote about you, because we show up into the kingdom of Jesus Christ having been we show up, shall I say, with all of this stuff that we bring because we're broken people, and we show up. And so not only does he write about you, and he writes in such a way that the information is so it can be discovered. The idea of the information is not some vague something up there that was written that I have no chance of understanding or knowing about. No, it was written so that you could understand, this is what I have for you. And I really think this verse kind of brings this out. I have plans. And the plans are to give you a future and a hope. It's amazing that he does that. But the other part is when we walk into the kingdom of Jesus Christ, the brokenness is restoration. And when Paul writes about that, the word he uses is the word we get the English word prosthetics from. It's the idea that you were mangled in sin, that sin did a number on your life. And so when you come into the kingdom, even though all of these promises are there needs to be restoration. There needs to be wholeness. He needs to rebuild, and so he puts his new nature in you. He restores you so that you have the possibility of living out what he wrote about you. That's fantastic news. He doesn't just come and say, I need you to be this, and we're like, I don't even have a chance. And then the third idea was, let me see if I can remember, because I don't have this written down. When you look like this, you should write everything down. reclamation. It's so you can go out and kick a dent for the kingdom. He's wired you to do that. Now from this, I got 4 ideas that I just want to show you quickly and talk with you about, and then this is what you need to know about yourself and how God works. God always begins with need and moves back to design. So when he was writing about you, he didn't, well, let me say it this way. You didn't show up here on the earth and God looked and said, what in the world are we going to do with Dave? Didn't see him coming. I wonder if we can make a spot for him somewhere. It's never how God works. That's not how we work. And remember, we're made in his image. So you can understand a bit about how God works based on how we work as human beings. Although we have a flawed way of working, he has a perfect way of doing this. And it gives God a bit of a human touch. But man, it's important to know this, that before he wired you and before he put your personality and all of the pieces of who you are together, he looked at this generation and he saw the need. And then he's like, we need a generation of people who have the potential of filling that need, who have the potential of meeting the needs in this generation. And he backs up and he made you. So when you look at someone else and say, man, I wish I had that person's personality or gifting or all that, man, and I've done that 1,000 times. I've done that so much where it's like, oh, I'd be kicking a dent too if I had that person's package. Do you see what I got stuck with? You've thought that about yourself, right? You know why you are the way you are? He needed you with that personality. He needed you with that gifting because you have a chance to make a difference in the kingdom in a way that no one else can. So when you start to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I wish I'd have just been put together, to remind yourself that he looked at need in this generation and he backed up and created you. And you're here. And he's counting on you to make a difference for his kingdom, to represent him. Second idea. You're a continuation of God's creative genius. So if you go back to the book of Genesis, I'm just trying to get you psyched up. I mean, I don't feel like I need to after I listened to you guys this morning, but just remember this. When you look at the book of Genesis, you start to look at that first chapter, his creative genius. God is a creating God, and so he didn't stop when the Genesis was done. He's turned his focus into creating people. And you're part of that. All his brilliance in creation was one day focused on you when he put you together. And David will talk about that. If you want to read a text that's just moving, read Psalms 139 where he says, I saw every part of you getting put together in your mother's womb. And I was there and involved because I'm a creating God. And he created you. You're part of that. You're a continuation of that. Third idea. We've talked about this, but this is just a reminder. You have been given a skill or ability the world needs, guys. We desperately need every follower of Jesus to take the gifting, the skill, the ability they have and engage it for the kingdom. And then this one. God is not trying to make you into something. He wants to expose who you already are. See, he's already programmed when he put his DNA, when he put all of that inside of you, and when he wrote the theses on your life, he already put everything in place for you to knock it out of the park, if you want to say it that way. He's not trying to make you into something. You're already made into something that's beautiful and productive and all of that. And I just want to highlight that for this reason. Just because he wrote a thesis on us doesn't mean we ever get it or ever live it out. And just a casual reading of Scripture will, you could quickly find people that he called and gifted that just blew it. So just because that's a reality doesn't mean that it automatically happens. It happens in the context of you understanding, this is why I'm here. And I'm going to make a difference for your kingdom. And I'm not going to whine about the personality you gave me. You guys, I've said this, some of you have heard me say that I grew up wishing I wasn't an introvert. I was so envious of some of my brothers who weren't. They were so cool. Like they had lots of friends. Then there's me. Yeah, he made all of us the way he wanted us. To kick a dent for the kingdom. Please don't wish you were something else. And really develop who he has you and who he wants you to be for him. Okay, so how do we do that? Here's just some general principles, just 4 of them, and I'm going to go through the first 3. I'm going to try to go through the first 3 really quickly, kind of camp out for just a few minutes on the last one. The first thing I think it's important that we do in this process of discovering who we are, ask. Now, first of all, it's important that you ask God, because he's the one that wired you. Ask the person that had put was the creator of you, that really put you together, that wired you the way you are. Ask him. Just the book of James says, man, if you need wisdom, and especially if you need wisdom on what am I to be in the kingdom, where's my spot in this whole thing, ask him. But then also ask the people around you, because all of us probably have some really good friends that are especially in tune to what we're good at and what we're not. I remember going, and by the way, this is a moment of vulnerability in your heart, because I remember going to a couple of guys and we hung out. We were pals. I mean, we did a lot together. Actually, one of those guys was out here just recently, and I remember saying, hey, I think I want to be this. I think this is what. The one guy busted out laughing. It's like, you got to be kidding me. Now, when you ask other people's opinion, remember that sometimes man, I don't even know how I want to say this. I think it's possible that, let me say it this way. If you go back and ask my childhood friends if they ever thought I'd be a pastor, I guarantee you not one of them saw that one coming. You know who really didn't see it coming? In fact, and you've heard me say this if you've been here long, I promised God that I wouldn't be, because my dad was. And I watched Dad, and I'm like, it's not happening. And then he kind of cornered me and all of that. It's a complicated story. So even as you ask your friends, always keep the filter in. That even as they're honest with you, there may be a part of you that is going to surprise them, because God is a creative God that does extraordinarily surprising things in us. So just that as a bit of a thing. But ask the people around you. Brainstorm with them. Like, man, I'm thinking about this. Second thing is reflect. Now, what I mean by reflect is I think it's really important in this process of discovering who we are to look back and look at our likes and dislikes. Now, here's just a little bit of my story. And I was in conversation with someone this morning earlier that really kind of, they were telling me a bit about their journey, and I'm like, it's amazing how this. So I was stuck in Florida. The short version of why I ended up in Florida, God doesn't want people in Florida. At least people like me. Joanne lived in Florida. So guess what? I thought she was pretty cool, and she kind of informed me that this is going to go anywhere, you better show up in Florida. I lived in Michigan. I loved 4 seasons. I didn't like a place that was hot, muggy, lots of people, bugs, and the whole state smelled like a sweaty body. Didn't like it. I moved there for one reason, not because I was following God, because I was following her. And it worked out. But I tell you all that to say this. There was something inside of me. It's like, yeah, this doesn't work. I do not like Florida. I think it was his way to trick me into getting out here. No, really. Look at your likes and dislikes. I promise you this about who you are. If you're actually doing what you're wired to do, you're going to love it at some point. Doesn't mean there's not going to be hard moments. Doesn't mean there's not going to be days when you feel like quitting and all of that. But at the end of the day, look at your likes and dislikes and say, man, and God will kind of direct you in that. And I really believe I'm a person, because of my personality and all that, I'm a person who's a bit of a loner. Guess what fits me? Custer County, especially when we moved here. Got out of that mess down there. And I'm so grateful that God has a heart for Florida, because it's not true what I said that he doesn't want people there. But you know what is true? The people that there love it, that are there, that are supposed to be there kicking a dent for it, love it there. Look at your likes and dislikes. Think back over the moments in your life when you felt satisfaction with something you've done, and whatever that was. And we're wired so different. Who knows what that was? But I moved from, at one point in my life, I lived in Alabama, and I was a chaplain assistant. I was an assistant chaplain in a prison. And it was a multiple prison complex, so we worked everything from minimum security to death row. And I got to go in day after day and work with guys that had made just horrendous decisions, especially when you got maximum security guys. Like, you don't walk into maximum security and think, these are some good guys. You're like, wow, what did you do? I thought I was going to spend my life as a chaplain in prison. And somehow I'm here. Because God directs your path. So in some ways, all right, I'm not working with inmates anymore. You guys aren't that level. But you know what? Well, maybe a couple of you. You know what I want most? See people get traction. And so he started me in prison where they were forced to listen to me because they were stuck. And he eventually brought me here. What are the things in your life, if you were to write down and jot and think about it, where did you feel like, man, that's me? That's probably what you're supposed to be doing. Remember. Okay, so now I need to hurry. Remember is simply this, that if the first one brings you to a place of vulnerability, then the second idea has much more to do with, as you think about reflecting a place of engagement in your own heart, like this is me. This one here should be your anchor. Now I'm going to remind you, and I broke this down a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to give you the short version of it. When that verse in Jeremiah says, I know the plans that I have for you. One of my plans is to give you a future and a hope. That's my plans for you. That's what I've written for you. The whole notion of future in that language and in that culture was forward and backward. So the best way to describe this is when they thought about that word, because it was a language that had word pictures with it, associated with it in the context of the words themselves, it was really the idea that you're sitting in a boat and you're rowing forward, but you're looking backwards. Now here's the reality of all of you here. None of us actually know what we'll be doing this week. Or what's the challenge and that you may be facing, or the assignment you're facing, not maybe this week, but next month or next year, or what are you working for? And there's this, that's Zach's son, in case anybody wants to know. Just general disruption in the church service. Where was I? See if we can pull this together and get a little shred of dignity. As you're moving, here's my point. The whole idea behind that is you move into an unknown future. You always look at the shoreline and see the monuments that are there from where he touched your life in the past. Because when the Psalms talk about thankfulness, it is not by accident that oftentimes they talk about thankfulness in the context of remembering. Because there's a piece of it, and even as we've gone through, Joanna and I have gone through this exercise of thinking about our story. We were talking on the way home the other day, just driving along, and I was struck by the monuments on our shorelines. Man, your purpose, however scary it might feel, is anchored in the reality. He was there then. He was there then. He was there when I was so broken, I never expected healing. He was there. So when you think about your purpose, anchor it into the reality as you move forward, not knowing, having any idea what's that direction. You absolutely know who's with you in this journey. And every life here, on the shoreline of every single life here, is 1,000 monuments to his goodness for you in those places. Don't ever forget them. And then the last one is just this. Start simple. My first idea under starting, just keep it really simple. If you don't really know what it is, just start somewhere. Let me give you a couple of stories of people who did things really small that made a big difference in lives. The one comes from the book of Acts, chapter 9. This story is interesting because of its placement in the book of Acts, and because it even got included. It's odd. Because what is the book of Acts about? This new movement, and big stuff's happening. Man, people are getting saved, and the Spirit's being poured out, and there's signs, and there's wonders, and there's all of this stuff. And then you get to chapter 9, and it's a story about a little old lady. And you're like, what? Remember Tabitha? All we know about her, here's what we don't know. We don't know that she did one miracle. We don't know that there was anything significant. You know what she did? Sewed robes for people. How does that how is that worthy of making it into the book of Acts where all kinds of big things are happening? You know what I think God's really trying to get our attention to? Every little thing matters when you do it from love. And here's what's interesting. So if you don't know the story, this lady who it says just did a lot of sewing, and she passes away, and the community comes there, and there's the widows and all these people, and they bring garments that she made, and they're weeping. It's like, what are we going to do? Tabitha's gone. Peter shows up on the scene, and Peter looks the situation over. I think he probably responded this way just because Peter's personality was fantastic. He's like, oh, we can't do without her. And he raises her from the dead. Now, here's why that's interesting. You know who didn't get raised from the dead in the book of Acts? Pastors. They can be replaced. No record of a worship leader getting brought back. Or leadership teams. You know who they couldn't do without? Somebody that knew how to love people well in a very practical way. And it's like, we got to have this one back. That's fantastic news. Just find someone with a need and begin to ask God, how can I help this person? The other person that I want to talk about, remind you of, is another story from Acts, and then I want to go to a teacher from Baltimore. Philip, he's one of the guys that were put in charge. For those of you who may not be familiar with the story, the church is starting to grow. They had widows that weren't being taken care of. They weren't getting the food delivery somehow, or there was a glitch in the system, and so they decided to put a couple guys in charge of it. So they select 7 guys. That's okay. You guys are in charge of making sure this all happens. One of those guys' name is Phil. So Phil just starts doing his stuff. And then eventually, it says this about him. He's one of the guys that gets kind of moved around. They call him Philip the Evangelist eventually. And he's one of the guys that kind of gets moved around, like God's like, I need you over here, and I need you to do something bigger. And it says this about him: great signs and wonders were done by the guy that took care of widows. How does that happen? Here's my point. He didn't start by doing great signs and wonders. He started by serving widows lunch. And he did it so well, God's like, we can't let this guy go. We're going to give him a bigger assignment. And all of a sudden, he's Philip the don't try to do something big. Try to be really faithful in something small, and God will never pass you over if you're doing something small really, really well for him. The third story is, this is rewinding the clock, and I'm not sure what year it was, but there was a sociology professor in the University of Baltimore that selected 200 boys from the slums of Baltimore. And he assigned one to each one of his students. And their job was this, part of their assignment for that semester was to learn about these boys, find out about their family setting, find out about what's going on in their world. Remember, this is slums of Baltimore. Find out about it, and then write what you think the prospects are that they'll go anywhere in life. At the end of it, there was 200 identical conclusions. This is what the students wrote about those 200 boys. They haven't got a chance. 25 years later, another professor's teaching the same class in that university, doesn't even know about that study, comes across a study, assigns his students to go out and find those 200, find out what happened. Try to chase them down, see what happened. There was 180 of them still in the Baltimore area. 20 of them had either moved or passed away. There's still 180 of them there. And what they discovered out of those 180 that were there, 176 were extraordinarily successful. That's a high ratio. They were lawyers, they were doctors, they were successful business guys, they were in corporations and all that. And so then this class interviewed every single one of those 176. And they said, what do you owe your success to? Every single one had a quick answer. There was this teacher. just happened to be that teacher was still alive. She was old but extraordinarily alert for her age, and they went and met with her. And this is the question they ask her. What was your magic formula? That's how we are, isn't it? Got to be a formula somewhere. And it's got to be somewhat magical for that kind of success. All she said was this: I love those boys. Never underestimate the power of love when you show up in a broken world. And if he leads you to the slums, he has amazing ability to change lives in the slums. But we don't live in the slums. We live here. And I said this last week. I think as you think about your purpose, just start with something simple. Every one of us, ask God to lead you to one. It might be somebody sitting here who's sitting here this morning with a broken heart, and he wants you to come alongside that person and bring hope back into that situation. It may be somebody you're working with. It may be someone out there in the school, maybe you're a teacher or you have kids in school and you know other, whatever it is. Keep it really simple and start somewhere. But start caring and start showing love. And I promise you that God can do an awful lot with a group of people who take that one seriously. Keep it simple. The second thing I'd say is keep it clear. This is all about him. This is not about us. And the better we get at shining the spotlight directly on him, the more he honors what we do. And the last one is just, I can't find the last one. Keep it life-giving. You know, I think about this on two levels. I need to wrap this up. I think about this on two levels. I think about it as a group of individuals sitting here who, if we can tap into the purpose God has given, if we quit looking around and comparing ourselves to someone else and what they're doing and just become a person who, I'm going to help you. I wonder what would happen. But then on a group level, I think it is, as much as I think it's that God writes theses about individuals, I really suspect he writes theses about people groups, churches. What if we do that? I hope we get all excited like, this is a fantastic time of the year to just care for people, love on them. Isn't it? Can't you get all jazzed about that? He's given us a certain personality here. I just start to scratch my head and say, wow, we're so lucky. I wonder what he wants us to do out there this year, this season. I think I'm going to just quit. I was going to say some more, but I think it's probably a good place to quit. You guys done? It's good when we all finish together. My challenge to all of us is this. I don't think we understand the degree that he's rooting for us to live out what he's put inside of us. And as we all kind of connect to our purpose, the kingdom of Jesus Christ is going to go forward in this valley in extraordinarily in ways, and it is already, and I can't wait to see where we are in a couple years from now. It's going to be fantastic, isn't it? Zach, would you come? just want to make this, if anybody needs prayer this morning, we're going to have a special time of prayer up here for Aiden. Aiden is going in to have surgery. Aiden, if you just come up, Kathy, if you, or Aiden for sure, and if, ask for a couple people to just gather around him. He has some tumor that's getting, that he's having removed on Friday. So Aiden, if you come up and just, we're going to gather around him. If anybody else needs prayer, please come up.